Okay, I guess we might as well get started. Looks like we have got quite a few have registered. I'm sorry right now. My video is not showing, so uh, don't know why at the moment. And I see someone else is also logged in under our account, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I just want to welcome everyone to our webinar today. Everyone can hear me? Just a quick thumbs up if everybody can. Just okay. Our webinar today about joining a board. My name is Darren Fox. I'm an alumni relations officer here at Brock University. Before we get started, I will remind everyone this is a virtual event, which we will be recorded, and images may be captured throughout the session that could be used for promotional purposes in the future. If you object to your photo being taken, please ensure to turn your camera off, or afterwards just let us know. We do encourage you to turn on your camera, as this webinar is meant to allow some open dialogue. If you'd rather ask questions, you may do so in the chat and Mario can address them. I will send an email after today's webinar with a survey that I would ask that you please complete, and we will also provide a link to the recorded webinar when it is posted. So now on to introducing our speaker today, Mario De Divittis. Mario is a proud Brock grad, graduated in 2006 with a BA in political sciences and a master's in 2008, again in political science. And he is a certified corporate director. He has served 6 years on the Brock Board of Trustees from 2014 to 2020, serving on every single board committee, including chair of the Capital Infrastructure Committee for 2 years and the Presidential and Provost Search Committee. In 2021, Mario was granted Trustee Emeritus title by the Brock Board of Trustees. In addition to his service to Brock, Mario is the inaugural and current chair of the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre, a board member at Penn Financial Credit Union, and a past board member at the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce. And I will leave it to you now, Mario, taking over.
Great, thanks, Darren. And thanks for everybody for spending your lunch hour with me and together. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. I've prepared a few slides that I can take you through, and I'll really zoom through the first few fairly quickly. But at any time, if anyone has any questions or comments or wants to, break into a conversation, I'm much more, comfortable doing that than just speaking throughout the entire 40 or 45 minutes that we have today. So I'll just put that out there at the start. Also, to all you Brock folks, Darren touched on it. My outside of my family and my community, Brock is up there for my top 3 loves. So anything that I can do for Brock, always happy to do, and I will continue to do that. And as I hope all you will participate as alumnus as well. So just a little bit about myself. I know Darren kind of got into a little bit about that. The second slide you'll see, and Darren, hopefully you can still toggle that. I've just prepared a little bit of an agenda today. So 5 minutes on kind of, who I am. We'll get into a little bit of like the types of boards, which I believe is not as complicated as people make it think. And then I think the more beef of the conversation would really be the effective boards and how to run an effective meeting. And these are just kind of things that I picked up on along my journey. So about me, really, I put that Barack Obama picture up in terms of kind of where I hang out. Primarily, I'm in this education nonprofit space. I started doing a lot of nonprofit professional work and then board work. And I think after years of doing that, and really the complexity of those boards, which I'll get into, I think people underrate nonprofit board governance and the challenges that you deal with. But that's really led to other folks, I guess, being interested in my board experience to join corporate boards. And corporate boards are less volunteering. You are getting paid to do that. But it is an entirely new, different world, but with a lot of the same principles and values attached to it that would make a successful board member. So, and I'll get into that as well. So I've got this picture up just because, when I first started going onto boards, like a lot of young people, I think it was a resume builder. You wanted to, grow your career. And I still tell Goodman students and students across Brock, it is the best way to kind of flex your muscles. If you believe that you have talents that are not being offered or shine within your, say, day job, volunteering for a board of directors is a fantastic way for you to really get, I guess, hard knocks training quickly, because you might not be a CA or somebody in accounting, but then you will be sitting on a board of directors that have a fiduciary responsibility to keep that organization financially healthy. So you're exposed to so much more information than you normally wouldn't be. So my journey on that is the next slide, and I is where I kind of first started. And really, my hope was to kind of get out to any organization that I could that aligned with what I liked. And my early board work, and I just kind of put the logos out, was the Chamber in the Niagara region. I've got a kind of an entrepreneurial background with my family, so I believed in supporting small business. So the Chamber was a natural fit. And then the Niagara region and municipalities across the country are mandated to have citizen boards. So not politicians, but each committee, whether it's a culture committee, whether it's a sustainability committee, whether it's an economic development committee, are filled by citizens. So every year, citizens can apply to those. So those were fairly easy, I guess, entry organizations for me to start my board career. And then as I started there, I really tried to sponge more veteran, seasoned board members. And that led me to kind of where I am now, the next slide, which would be spending time at Brock, as Darren said, as a board of trustee, with the First Ontario Performing Arts Center, and Penn Financial. All three of them different, but I like to say they're all kind of, really promoting my local community. And that's kind of my true north in terms of what I select to get myself involved in. Obviously, as an alumnus, much like all of you, I support Brock and I love Brock. Having to serve on the board was a phenomenal learning experience. Not only did it help me professionally, I think intrinsically, it definitely filled my spirit, my heart, and I learned a lot in terms of some of the complexities that universities have. Brock has a budget around 250 million. So you're really managing that. There's 9 unions that are actually at the university. So you're dabbling into collective bargaining. You're dealing with faculty, you're dealing with staff, you're dealing with community. So there's a huge, you know, conduit of learning that you can do through that. The First Ontario Arts Center is an intermunicipal board, so it's kind of actually fairly new for the region of Niagara. So the city contributes about $1.5 million to their budget, and then there's a board of directors that got started 2 years ago that is really in charge with moving the direction forward. But we're still kind of committed and partnered with the city. So it also brings different complexities around appearing before council and having a concept of where the general city council is going. Penn Financial is the last one that I'm in right now, and that is an entirely private organization. It is a cooperative, but with the main intent of creating profit. The main difference between a cooperative and your regular financial institution is cooperatives are mandated to give 4 to 5% of their net revenue back to the community. And I'm proud to say Penn Financial 2 years ago committed to contributing 10% of our net revenue back into the Niagara region. So that's kind of why I got involved in Penn Financial. A very large credit union in terms of Ontario. It's probably around the 35th ranked. And we control $800 million of assets, with constantly looking at ways to merge with other credit unions, grow, adapt. Anyone who obviously does online banking, which is most of us these days, that world of technology savviness in the financial sector, very, very intriguing, very fast-paced moving. All these opportunities really led into other areas that allowed me to, one, do really fun and humble things, and I would probably point to the next picture, and opportunities that really were an artery to other opportunities. I like to kind of promote that to people, regardless of their career point, whether you get into a university board, I like to say the natural cousin is a hospital. So now I do a lot of work with Niagara Health System and Hamilton Health Science because they're both structured in very similar ways: faculty versus physicians, community-based unions. So once you start participating in those worlds, you'd be surprised how quickly it snowballs into other opportunities as you're doing it. And this photo is just kind of a really beautiful picture for me. It's kind of a proud moment to say I graduated and then was able to hand out a Spirit of Brock medal to a future Brock alumni. So that's kind of just about me and my background on it. And all those experiences shaped some of the slides that I prepared for us today. So in terms of types of boards, again, I touched on this earlier. I think a lot of people get caught in this too much. I think people want to feel like you need to learn Robert's rules, and you absolutely do in terms of helping run an effective meeting. But I'll get into shortly in the next few slides what truly makes a good board. Now, I will say there's essentially, I like to say, 3 different types of boards. And I know there's 4 here. And the 4th one I put up is just to kind of acknowledge that a lot of people use this language of a policy board. But actually, a policy board is really not a board. It is any board that typically drives governance. When you're selecting boards, there's really 3 that you're going to consider: a governing board, a working board, or an advisory board. The working board is, and I've served on other boards like this. I was a past board member of my church. That is when you are rolling up your sleeves and you are doing the work. Um, I'm a Rotarian, so we fundraise, we join Sunfest festivals, and we're doing all that work. So that's your working board, still operating with procedures and policy. A governing board is much like the organizations that I alluded to earlier. So the board has the authority to direct and provide its owners or stakeholders, whether that's your students, your faculty, in the corporate side, whether it's pure shareholders or the board, staff or members. And you can set that initial direction in terms of its best interests and its overall strategy. None of these boards, though, and I would even say a working board, as long as it does have a staff, you really do want to stem away from operational organization. The thinner the board is, the harder it is to do that. And that's why, a working board does require a lot of hands-on. Your advisory board is really more so to provide insight. I like to call them kind of like a sounding board. You don't necessarily have the authority to kind of mandate much. As much as those governing boards. I would say the last point on governing boards is just because you have some mandates, there are very clear ones that you are responsible for. I've had this issue with the PAC most recently. We have one responsibility as a board, one staff person, and that is your CEO. There is no other level of staffing that really reports to you unless it's internal auditor that has a dotted line to the board. So if a CEO has a decision to remove or promote staff, that is her opportunity or his opportunity to do so. As much as the board may like that or not, it is ground that you should cautiously stay away from. If it starts to impact the overall strategy and the judgment of that CEO, that's your conversation around the CEO's judgment, but it's not about a staffing decision. So the next few slides are really what I'm hoping to give you kind of a template on how to run good meetings and kind of some principles that I think make effective boards and board meetings. So I don't think the 2 are any different. They're attached. You can't have an effective meeting and not have an effective board, much like you can't have an effective board and have a really poor meeting. They are joined at the hip. And I believe they're both based on a few different values. Trust being the biggest one. A shared mission, everyone's got to be there for the right reasons. So whether and I've seen this across all the boards that I've participated on, you might get really wooed and say, yeah, I'm on the Brock board. And that person really doesn't put students first. or doesn't necessarily believe in the power of a university, and she or he will last 6 months to 1 year. Um, and that happens across the board in various different boards. The other concept I would say is you need a really open culture. And I get into that a little bit more, but the open culture has to be is multi-sectored. It has to be around diversity, around the people that that you're working with. Um, One where you can bring innovation and ideas to, because a board is in charge of strategy and moving that organization forward. So you have to have an open mind to do that. And a big piece that I'm really passionate around is open dissent. A board is no good if everyone just agrees and says kumbaya. Um, but the tough part is, digesting difference of opinions. But when you start to actually listen to understand, you could really move that innovation dial forward. I don't know too many innovative companies or boards that don't have dissent. Um, and you'll see that in their group dynamics. So boards and meetings, the next slide, typically I see them getting kind of criticized for four main reasons, and there's other ones too, but I definitely think they fall under this. Failure to identify what matters most. So a board is gathering and they're not necessarily talking about um, what they should. So, at Brock, we had conversations around, and that's why I love the concept of having Senate and faculty. You will never forget about students at a Brock board meeting. You shouldn't. It's student first. And because you have faculty there, they remind you. If you have all corporate individuals like myself, participating, as much as I like to think I will always put students first, it's not my day job. So there is a potential for me to lose that. So I'm open to always being reminded that way. It's much like the hospital space I'm in as well. Lots of different anxieties and frustrations that you can get within your health system, but it always has to be patient first. And I was a part of some of the closures with NHS, and one of the things I preach a lot when we were on that kind of process was the closest care is in the best care. If you didn't necessarily have the structures in one community, but you had it in another building that was 20 minutes out. And that was the patient first approach. A lack of an ownership agenda. So, who owns that agenda? Who builds it? So if a CEO or the president builds the agenda all the time and the board doesn't have any opportunity to shape that, you can imagine what type of things are going to the agenda. Things that are celebratory, things that maybe aren't getting looked at because it falls on his or hers responsibility list. Director acquaintance. I think this is a really tough one because boards don't meet all the time. They generally meet once a month, maybe once every other month. So picture working for a team that you don't know that much, and picture, trying to build a trusting culture with people you really don't know, and you only know them around the board table. Which, for those of you who've been on boards, you don't really have ample time to discuss and chat. So how can you really build a sincere relationship that way? That's why part of the things I've trained with, like the Directors College, there was 5 modules. There were 5 weekend retreats. We had dinner, lunch, breakfast with the entire group for 5 modules, um, because you really started building relationships with them. So I could say, Leslie, I hear what you're saying, but I don't see it that way. Like, help me understand that, as opposed to, no, Leslie's wrong and I'm voting this way. Like, that is not moving the innovation of that board. And by you not doing that, you're not helping its members, its students, its shareholders. Um, the passive behavior despite explicit authority. So that's, I think there's a lot of boards that suffer from this. You go to a board meeting and, it lasts 30 minutes and nothing gets teased and discussed, even though you have tremendous authority to act. In the university space, there's lots going on with Laurentian University. The board person in me wonders, what was those board meetings like? Like, did you really want to break down a tough problem? When I entered Brock was around 20 million in deficit. we had some serious conversations, and it moved to a much more prosperous time. When I was part of the President's Search Committee, we had a failed search, and we luckily were able to find Dr. Gervin Farhan, who's done a tremendous job at Brock. So having those, comfort to flex your authority and use it and do that with staff really can build more innovation for that organization. Um, Key meeting ingredients, a few I listed here: knowledge. Everyone around the table's got to know what they're talking about. It's very tough to fake a 3-hour board meeting. So you don't necessarily have to have all the skills. Um, I usually come to a board for the same reasons. I'm the governance guy that is probably going to create better policies, create a good culture, um, think kind of a bigger, grow partnerships. I'm not somebody who's going to really zone down on IT. I respect it and know enough to understand it now. And when I say that, I don't mean the insides of an IT unit. I mean the right questions to ask about IT. Much like you don't need to be an accountant, but you should have the right questions to ask around financial integrity. And then do your readings, and because usually the information's there. So the next point is the information. So staff is actually presenting the right information, and you're going to have to push staff. So, a typical one in say the credit union was, our mortgages went up. Okay, well, what were they last year? Like, what were they compared to to other credit unions? Or our enrollment went up abroad. Okay, did our first choice enrollment go up? So teasing that right information. I touched on authority already, having the power to govern and make decisions. So sometimes you can make that wrong decision, or that difficult decision, but it's still the board's decision to move forward with. In the hospital system and university system, hiring, presidents, the process in which you might take to do that, whether it's, you know, um, open or closed, like you have that authority to do that. And the more you don't use that, you're actually providing much more uncertainty and anxiety to the group that you're serving because you're not acting on your authority. People want their boards to act. That's why they're there. If you're not, you're that slide I said before, that kind of lame duck board that is really losing respect from its members. Motivation, so the alignment of interest and with key stakeholders. So you are motivated by what works. So Penn Financial, truly local banking is our slogan. That's why we moved our 4% to 10 in terms of what we contribute back to Niagara. And we hope that if we, grow more business, we can be motivated to support Niagara better. So maybe we can move that 10 to higher. Just to give you an example to pay the privilege of credit unions, Van City Credit Union, which is out in British Columbia, is the biggest credit union in Canada, provide 40% back to their local community in the province of British Columbia. They're attached to issues around poverty and women's housing. And if you ever have the opportunity to Google them, you could, look at that credit union and see the power of that board. Time. So luckily, Darren kept us starting when we could, because those ingredients also contribute to trust and respect. So the frequency of when you meet, how prepared you are, how efficient you are. So I always try to end my board meetings 5 minutes early. So I'm hoping to end this one 5 minutes early as well, unless the board wants to use that time for other business. 10 effective board leadership traits. And by no means are any of these exhausted. And these are just kind of my opinions over the course of, my time. So the biggest one is that climate of trust. People need to know that they can voice their opinions. They can, what is discussed in the boardroom stays in the boardroom. That's the biggest breach. And unfortunately, I've been, on the receiving end of those breaches where there's a decision and somebody finds out and I get a phone call. This, happened 2 weeks ago. And I said, well, how would you know that? That really puts a fracture in the relationship, much like, and these are just relationships that you have across any of your life, your husband, your wife, your friendships. When something of a serious and significant nature is discussed and it's broken, that has consequences. And rebuilding trust is harder than sometimes gaining it. Facilitates oversights and promotes independence. So, the board is its own unit. And sometimes it's challenging when you have a mixed representation. So there's benefits to it, like I alluded to Brock, to say, there's faculty, there's students. But sometimes when there's a large number, and I don't think number really, people get stuck on, oh, the board has 20 people, that's too many. Well, if you have trust and it's working well, then wouldn't 20 people even be more beautiful than having 8? It's just having more people requires the right type of people to really demand trust and to know the board's independence and practice proper oversight, which sometimes is hard to do. So if you're a physician and you're on the board and your hospital got more money and your unit needs it and other units need it, can you separate yourself from that? And yes, there's conflict of interest, procedures that hopefully will encourage you to do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean they always do. So it's really that kind of bias and trust. That goes into what I mentioned around number 4, responsibilities and boundaries, knowing what you can and can't do. I always like to say, eyes in, arms around. You never have your arms deep into the organization, but you're kind of hugging it with like not control, but with kind of like compassion and pride. I one of the big things I got as compliments from some of my Brock colleagues was I never dabbled where I shouldn't. And, we were always trying to look at growing staff to do better work that they're doing. Number 3 demands board, and I use the word strongly, like not promote, not advocate, you demand board diversity. And it is very complicated. I see Deep with his hand up. I'm just gonna finish this point and I'll get you in Deep. And I use the demand part because it is quite challenging to move to a diversity piece because you can get lost in the conversation of what does that look like. And usually boards get lost in that. And then the concept of diversity does not occur. So that heightened word of demand really has to say, no, we are putting something here, whether it's 50% gender equity, whether it's, representation across the board from all the cultures we serve. The board has to demand that because if they don't, it will not occur. So Deep, let me see if I can unmute you. Feel free.
Yeah. Hi, Mario. I'm also a alumni from 2013, and I got an email about this event, and I've always wanted to join a board, and I thought it'd be good to get some insight. I wanted to ask, I guess, what your opinion is in terms of the difference between the different sizes of boards. So, I'd always thought that a good size of a board would be between 8 to 11, I think. Mm-hmm. And I was quickly just Googling the Board of Trustees at Brock, and it's about 26 members.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about, I guess, the difference of benefits and disadvantages of both.
Sure. Thanks for being here and asking the question too, Deep. I appreciate, stopping me from talking to entertain questions. It's a lot more fun that way. You're right. I think the most popular belief is 9 to 11, 7 to 13, like that kind of range is typically what you'll see on most nonprofit boards. You'll see that certainly in corporate boards. In structures like hospitals or universities, it's quite different. And it's really because the ownership of Senate, and rightfully so. So with the universities in particular, the size, and this came up in, every year almost, like it's almost silly how often it comes up. And because of the representation is so deep, one would argue that you need better representation from faculty, from students, from the people that you serve. In a credit union space, it's fairly easy to say, well, members are members. In a university space, that's not the case. Like I said, there's different levels of staffing. There's faculty, there's students, there's alumni. I do think the larger number does pose more challenges. I think the benefit of having a large number, if you can get it to work, is certainly something that you should strive to. Unfortunately, and maybe it's just me I'm an impatient optimist. That's how I describe myself. That I would hope that people can get along easier together. But and, you see in the world today that that's becoming a lot more harder. Much like councils, you see municipal councils really drive that down. But it is inherently it shrinks the representation. If I could build it in a utopian way, I would have a bigger board. I'd have a Brock board that had alumni from various kind of years. I'd have faculty, I'd have lay members on a municipal council. When they shrink wards, some people think it's good because, there's less counselors, we pay them less. Counselors make in some communities anywhere from 7,000 to 17. But then you're also assuming that one person can represent 100,000 people in that ward. So the conceptual piece is actually, I believe, you're actually losing connectivity and accountability that way, because then your artery to actually have a voice. So if we took away the student president from Brock, or if you had just a student president, could you imagine if you had 3 or 4 students on it? McMaster is one school that has actually more than 24. There's more pathways for you to actually be heard and seen. Not to say that a sheer number does that alone. It really changes from board to board. If you have a board that does foster a lot of these, effective leadership things that I'm talking about, then the number doesn't matter. But unfortunately, I don't see a lot of boards that have that. So I would be hesitant to shrink the number. I would say in most nonprofits, I'd keep it around that 9 to 13 and evaluate how that goes. If you are really struggling to make decisions, people sometimes go to the number first. I would say before you go to the number first, get training, look at your agenda. Are you practicing emotional intelligence on the board? Are you being strategic? And if that's still not happening, then you might want to look at numbers. Within Brock, I think we shrunk it by 2 or 3. It was 24, and then I was on it when it was 21, and then it went back to 24. Honestly, at that range, it doesn't matter. When you're adding 2 or 3 people, I don't think the shift is as serious as people think it is. And I'd rather see the attention focused on the actual culture of that board. So hopefully that helps. Back to the list, unless there's another question. I don't see any. Discussion around parameters. That and number 6 are kind of hand in hand. Far too times, I think a lot of people are probably attest to this. The conversation goes south. People don't know how they got there. People don't even know what they're talking about anymore. You need to really set that out before you start. And if you don't, I blame the chair on that. And when it doesn't happen, I blame the chair again to not rein it in. Because you have to, and like I would say, like a CEO report, sometimes when that's presented, I'm not going to read the report. You have it. I assume that you did the work, you read it. So I won't, dive into it. I might shed light on one, or we're talking about, issues that dance between 2 committees, say like a building being built at Brock, and then I guess some of the internal audit piece. So like, how did we get that money? Should we use it somewhere else? That's not the role of this committee. So you're really ramming in the parameter to say, we're talking about the new zone and the construction of the zone. And if that project's moving forward, we're not talking about whether the project should have been funded or not, or we could have funded health sciences or something else. That's not the parameter of this conversation. But sometimes people expand on that, and you really start driving the board into a rabbit hole that breaks trust, that isn't serving the purpose of the topic, and you're really losing kind of faith in that board. So each time you address an agenda item, state what we're doing. Like I say, just a clear start with what we're talking about before each report. And it doesn't take much to do that. And there's tools like scorecards and legends that you could do in the homework that, lets people know that that's what this topic is going to be discussed for. Number 7, I think I touched on this a little bit. You aim for consensus, but you always want to have open dissent. And dissent's not disloyalty. Like just because we butt heads about, maybe funding one building and not the other, we're all in it for the same reason. We love Brock, or, we want the art center to improve. So knowing that we can have that open dissent is critical, because you're not really getting any good ideas if you don't. So focuses discussion, restrains directors. So when it does, get a little hairy, and sometimes it can get pretty personal in some sort of meetings, especially when you're talking about collective bargaining, diversity, you really got to stick to the concept. And in particular, people I find in very good ways, they are, affected by the issue. So, I sit on a board with a member who their kids have autism, and he will openly come out and say, when education policy comes up, that's a trigger for me. Like I need to be restrained a few times. Good on him for acknowledging that. And he's also put it out there because he trusts the board. And so like I would hope that I can bring that for him when he can't. But restraining directors to keep, some of their bias out, some of the parameters of the discussion on what the agenda item is discussing. Ensure that the board always prevails, so that the board is doing what it's supposed to, evaluating their CEO, fiduciary responsibility and duty of care. You're prevailing, you're constantly looking at those 3 responsibilities. Those are the only responsibilities a board should be doing. And then 10, quickly handles or defers new business. When it gets brought up, if it's not in the slated place, then you are deferring it. Or if that issue, you want to talk about that building that didn't get funding, we're not doing that here right now. So I hear you, I understand you, we're going to move it to a later point. All these things are small pieces, but when you're actually doing them, they definitely make a meeting much more sound and members much more engaged. The next slide is just principles. Again, just things I always try to keep everyone kind of attend top of mind, I guess. Don't get caught up in the discipline process all the time. The culture will dictate the process. Just because you've got Robert's rules and you've memorized it, if the culture doesn't, shape that dialogue, people won't use the rules. It's great when somebody can intervene and then say, well, Robert's rules of order would state this. That only rubs on people in a good way when the culture is good. So the rules of engagement and decision making is known and respected. So there's cues that people can talk in. You can imagine on a board with 25 people, hard to get everyone in. So just, refereeing time even, and everyone in the queue to speak. Being aware of everyone's bias. Conscious bias training is really only now becoming a lot more popular. I really hope it's, I said this to a board member the other week. I really hope that and diversity training is like a segment or a concentration in like a business school that you would just have. You pick HR, you pick marketing, you pick finance. You should be able to pick diversity as well. And hopefully boards get trained on that. It's not a matter of whether we need it or not. It's like eating healthy. You do it because you know you have to do it. And it fills your soul and it keeps you a healthy human. So, the boards I work with, if I chair an HR committee, I put in my chair's goals. We were doing an annual conscious bias training because that might have shaped you. Like, look at the year that we had. I would bet that your bias has changed in this last year than it might have, 5 years ago. And if it didn't, then you're comfortable enough to talk about it. And it really, your boards are really the benefit from that. The next one is board engagement and empowerment. This is a really hard one to do. As I said, like the worst thing, and I report into boards too, like I've been a nonprofit leader and actually starting a new job next week with a national board. And to keep board members entertained, just so and engaged. So I'm not at meetings and I leave and say, honey, why am I even here? Like when I drive home and I talk to my wife, what am I doing? Like they don't ask me to do anything. They maybe just want my money, or you don't really serve a purpose. So that ED or that CEO really has to spend time talking to those board members, not just on a need like help us. Those a healthy relationship should have board and the CEO as this harmonious relationship where sometimes you butt head, but you learn from each other and you can leverage the board skill set. Why wouldn't you? There's 12, seasoned, passionate people that you can get advice from and support from. I see Brent with his hand up. So Brent, I'm going to unmute you here. Go ahead, Brent.
Thanks for your time, Mario.
No problem.
You touched on your early experiences. Would you mind sharing, if you don't mind, that first role when you were on a board, the granular details of how you secured that? And I certainly appreciated your sharing the key ingredients, and you said you were the subject matter expertise has flowed towards governance. What were the early contributions when you were new to role you were able to make? And I guess perhaps my question is, how cold was the water when you first jumped in?
Yeah, so pretty cold, because I wasn't a governance kind of geek at the start. And I guess, I say this about like pretty much life. Like I credit, the group that's on here today, because you're all that much savvier to get on a board. You showed up today to learn about boards, to talk about them. Deep was you said you were looking to get into boards. I find a lot of people talk it, but then don't do it. I'm pretty aggressive on hitting the concrete. So I spend time, like I think LinkedIn is a fabulous tool. I LinkedIn the heck out of people, saying I'm a younger person that wants to start. And usually to anyone who's more seasoned in their career on this call, yourself, you like sharing that, in particular with younger people. So to the younger people that are on this call, people want to share that with you. And to even to the more seasoned people who are not on boards, other board members want to share that too, because we're all doing it for like kind of a community purpose. And the more people you can pull in the tent, the better. It's the fear of starting that stops people. So, I started random conversations with people. I also took a good look at what I'm good at. Like I'm a big believer on personality dimensions, MBTI, strengths-based indicators, what motivates me. And so I know what I'm good at. And I tell people this in interviews. If you want me to lead an organization, you want me to get you more popular, you want me to get you more money, I'm good at that. If you want me to, not build and go slow, wrong dude. Don't ask me. I'm not somebody who just doesn't want to change and grow. I'm somebody who again, I describe myself as the impatient optimist. If an organization is doing great, okay, how can we be even better? So I looked at organizations that kind of were valued that way, and then also liked the same stuff that I liked. So I like business, I like economic development. So I went to the chamber, and the chamber has lots of committees that weren't boards just yet. So I joined, a governance affairs committee. And then I realized there wasn't one for young people. So I created Next Niagara, myself and a friend. And we said, well, the chamber is always full of old white men. Like, where is a 25-year-old? So I said, well, why don't we just start it ourselves? And we did. And now that one currently exists in Niagara, and it's a great opportunity for young people to get involved. But the ins are around you more than you think. And I usually reference churches, not from a faith or spirituality standpoint, is proximity. Every home is surrounded by a church in a portion of of your radius. Every church needs help. They have funds, they have duties, and they don't have that many people volunteering. So I used to tell a lot of my business students, volunteer at church, like accounting students I teach leadership to them and say, volunteer to church, do their books. You just got a treasurer position faster than you would ever think you could have before. There's ample opportunity for you to volunteer if you actually hunt for it. But much like everything else, you got to kind of scrap and go get it. Volunteering gets this bad stick where, I'm giving my time. I should have so many people calling me. But it is actually work for that organization. So it's not enough for you to say, hey, I'm a young person and I want to volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, which is also a great one to have and an easy one to go in and volunteer with. But you got to come prepared because they have to do it right and take you on and manage that. So a better ask for a young person is, I'd like to volunteer with you. I have 3 hours a day and I'm available on Wednesdays and Fridays. Like that's giving me some information to say, okay, Brent and Deep, I can use you this way. But look at like your communities that have anchor organizations, chambers, rotaries, churches, cities. All those have opportunities for you to volunteer. And once you start building, then it's just keep on asking because other board members sit on other boards. Like I said, once you start doing one or two, you start to really, pick that up. It's usually just the start, much like life, really, that is a challenging part. The first child is always harder than the second or the third. Just going back to the slides, the last, I've got a quote there, but that's fine. I want to make sure I open it up for other questions. There's a slide on agenda development. I put this one out there just because I often get a lot of people that actually just say, well, our agenda is like all over the place. And I've talked about having a good kind of start. So this is just kind of a best practice template. There's really two sources of an agenda item. There's management's knowledge and insight. So management taking things to you that they should. So if, the Arts Center, is right now during a pandemic, obviously, there's no, events, there's no, no much of anything at this point. So taking us knowledge on what other art sectors are doing. That's not an issue that, maybe boards will ask for, but management have to bring real good insight to the board too. And that's that relationship that you really want to build. You don't want management hiding stuff. You don't want staff not bringing things to say, oh, this unit is not doing that well, so we're not bringing it to it. Because that really builds this unhealthy, relationship because eventually the board's going to know. So in an issue where an organization is struggling or a school is struggling, and if that issue was never brought to the board's attention, it's going to get there eventually. And when it does, you're going to have to deal with all that mess because of the failure to bring it to. And the mess is in the feelings, not so much in the issues and cleaning it up. It's built into the trust of the organization, the communication of the organization. And those things are very hard to repair. Looking at financials and making decisions is not as difficult. It's the people that are difficult. And then the other source is the issues that are important to directors. So directors always want to know, certain things. They want to know how we're doing financially. How are our people? And, are they happy? What are we doing to get talent? Are we moving strategically? Are we meeting our shareholders' needs or expectations? And then the best, I guess, practice template, I've listed kind of 10 pieces. So I think a chair definitely has a big role to play in terms of ensuring that it moves forward and reins everything in, all these items. You'll see kind of things that you've seen before, minutes and a conflict of interest, review action items. I don't see a lot of boards doing that. I think it's good. I think there's different ways to express that. Smaller boards, I think you can go up and actually have an action items kind of chart. Bigger boards like the university, we use things called scorecards that were great. Each and every committee had one, and it laid out all the goals of the year. And they color code them. So, we do this everywhere I go, really. Each committee has a list of goals, and they're broken down into quarters. And a board member can just pick up that one page and say, okay, here's the list that we're doing. And by color, I know where we are. Red is we haven't stopped it or it's in danger. White blank means we haven't started it. Yellow means we're working on it. And greens means it's done. So I don't really have to pester or bug staff about certain things because it's in the scorecard. And I could leave the conversation to be strategic in nature. And I don't have to, ask about, smaller stuff. Like at the credit union, there was a branch that had old, technology. Have we improved that? It's in the scorecard. You don't need to ask that. If you look at kind of the technology bucket, you could see the goal of replacing all ATMs. And the comment and the color will tell you. Board committee reports. Each committee through the chair should present something to the board. Again, don't go into the whole kind of spiel of what your committee did, because the committee did that work. We trust board members to do that work. But it gives us a synopsis of kind of what you accomplished. Strategy updates, a CEO report. CEO report, again, people have read. You don't need to dive into it. The strategy updates, again, where we are on this, and specific items of business. So that's where, something the board chair and the CEO have staged certain pieces. So whether it's we're building a new building and we're bringing that issue up in quarter number 2, or we are closing a branch in Niagara Falls. Ideally, when you're building your agenda, you're doing this for the year. You're not married to it, but you know certain things that you're dealing with that year and what meeting you're going to bring it up. Because if you're really building an agenda from board meeting to board meeting, trust me, after the third one, you're going to be like, you're going to feel like you never got anywhere. You want to be able to build the whole agenda at the start of the year and then move it as you need to. But if you're building a building, or if there's, end of year, or if there's a staff evaluation, when you actually sit down and look at the things that you're responsible for, you have a good idea of when you usually do this. And then it becomes a lot more consistent and smoother. And year by year, it gets smoother and smoother. And what happens is it leaves so much more time for you to talk about strategy and innovation. Because in October, we always do this. March, we always get an update on fundraising, whatever it may be. But it leaves a lot more room for, what I call like kind of Google time, where you can bring, really fun, crazy ideas to discuss with the board. And that's what boards want to be hearing anyway. The last 2 slides are kind of good reads I like to share. One is a popular kind of business book that, hopefully you've seen before. It's Good to Great by Jim Collins. You can read this. It doesn't matter if you are a board member or a business person or just an individual. I touched on it before. I'm a big Kobe Bryant guy. Always trying to get better the next day. This is kind of my book for that. How to, continually improve yourself. This other book is specifically for board governance. It's my favorite. It's my favorite Canadian one. He's a professor out of York, Richard LeBlanc. He's phenomenal on this. This handbook I find great. One of the best things I think about this book, it's not expensive. And I touched on this earlier. You don't have to be an expert in all areas of the board. Hopefully you get into one area that's your piece. Strategic planning, HR, board governance. But this book gives you a lot of good questions. And I still do this. I take 20 questions every committee I have. This book actually breaks down good questions that everyone should ask an audit committee, or good questions that everyone should ask an HR committee. And that's your job as a board. You don't need to be the HR expert on the committee. Most likely you have an HR person that's serving that committee via staff or the chair. But you have learned about the questions you should ask around, your CEO's performance. Do we have a succession plan? And it's not a bad question. Like, you hire somebody, the first thing you want to do is start building the succession for that person, because it's just good governance. Like, somebody might win the lottery. Unfortunately, somebody could get sick, but you're asking questions because they're just, much like a doctor would ask you questions around, has your weight increased? Have you got sleep? How are you feeling? It's the same thing around a board. And this book, I find, gives a lot of great questions that way. The last slide, I'd say, and just a closing quote on it. I like to remember this when, I'm in board meetings, and it's JFK quote. And I find a lot of board members kind of don't listen to us, unfortunately, but we enjoy the comfort of our opinion. We don't necessarily enjoy the discomfort of thought. And when somebody else brings up an entirely different point from you on the board, don't take it like it's throwing yours out. Take it as an opportunity for you to broaden your knowledge. And I always say, like Carl Jung, like find out why something irritates you. It leads to a better understanding of yourself. And if you're able to take a difference of opinion and thought constructively, you're doing two things. You're probably growing your knowledge and you're bringing that other board member with you, because you need consensus and you need trust. And nobody's going to trust you or want to work with you if they don't think they're actually being heard or listened to. So hopefully this was, entertaining for you, and hopefully you learned something. Again, happy to be a badger with all of you. And if you want to stay connected in any way, it's 2021. It's pretty easy to find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or any other means. So thanks for your time, everybody. If anyone has any comments or questions, happy to take them.
Maybe a quick question, if I might.
Sure, Deep.
I just wanted to hear, I guess, your thoughts on the communication and relationship between board members and the CEO or other management.
Mhm.
And, obviously that's a key part of a board's role, and whether you had any thoughts with that, maybe challenges you've had, any examples you might be able to share.
Yeah, so I think a healthy relationship, much like you'd have with your partner, your parents, your best friends. I don't know one healthy relationship that does not have conflict. So the sign of a good marriage is when you can talk about something difficult, maybe bump some heads, and then it deepens the relationship, and you can go to your partner and talk about certain things easier. You can experience joy, you can manage conflict. That's what you want to get with a CEO and a board chair. You don't want the relationship where everything's roses all the time, because nothing is roses all the time. There's lightness and darkness in everything. So I got a kind of a mentor board chair that always says, Mario, if I have 4 good days with the president, that's great, that's a good week. And I've got other mayors that I work with that say, the mayor I work with and the CAO, like we butt heads all the time. I'm like, well, how often? He's like, oh, at least like 2 or 3 days a week. I'm like, that's not bad. Like considering like the concept that you're in, it's a politician who's looking to get reelected. You're a CEO who every 4 years is worried about a new politician coming in. So you need to expect that. It's just how you manage some of that. You want things to be very clear. You want it to be constantly engaged. If you're not talking to your CEO often, there's a problem there. Or the bigger problem is also if the CEO controls the entire board. If everyone says, oh, yes, Deep, oh, you're totally right, you're totally right, not a good thing. Not saying you don't trust that CEO, you're not pushing him to be better. He's a human behavior, he or she's a human. Everyone responds that way. So you want it to be something where you can manage all walks of feelings and communications. And it's something that has to be always engaged. It's going to be challenging, but you want it to be on the same page. I can tell you if the chair and the CEO are not on the same page, that organization is going to suffer over time, more visibly than you would imagine. So it's something that needs constant support. And I wouldn't tell anyone to be a chair if you don't really put some self-reflection on it, because it's a good amount of work. Leslie, see your hand up.
Well, actually, hello, Mario. It's Paul McPherson.
Yeah, Paul.
Leslie is the Brock grad. I'm just horning in on the presentation, but great presentation, Mario. Learned Learned a lot of things here. The question I have is around board meetings and the length of board meetings. And I wonder if you have a opinion position on an effective length of a meeting.
Yeah, great question. I think, you know, unfortunately, there's huge discretion in this. I'm not a fan of long meetings. I don't think humans can tolerate a 4-hour meeting. And I would say the corporate side has this a lot better than the nonprofit side.
Right.
You know, and I think same with length of meeting and board packages. Like director training, whether you do it out of, you know, MAC or U of T or the Canadian ones, both of them will tell you no board package should ever be longer than 75 pages. That's a long package. You know, I put Brock on, you know, sometimes we get documents that are 300 pages. Now, sometimes you're getting a report that is 60 pages. Like, do I really need to have this? And sometimes you question why no organizations do that, because sometimes they just try to drown you. Like I've been a staff member with on organizations, and they say if the board says we don't provide more information, we haven't provided enough insight, then we're going to give them the kitchen sink. And all of a sudden, the next board meeting, you drown out the board members because there's too much pages, too much information. I think a healthy board meeting, if you can't get it done in 2 to 3 hours, you've got a problem. I think 2 hours is a good amount of time. Now, a board, like usually there's committee meetings that, you know, take maybe arguably longer sometimes, depending the volume of it. But I think if you're ever going over 2 hours a meeting, you should meet more than. You know, some hospital boards meet every month. Some university boards meet every 3 months, every 4 months. If we're meeting every 3 or 4 months and I'm getting 400 pages, in a committee meeting 3 hours and a board meeting's 4 hours, let's meet more. Because I can't, as a human, process all that information. In particular, when boards, it's not just a board meeting. So you might have a committee, 2 committee meetings and a board. That's usually the responsibility if you're on a board. Serve on 1 or 2 committees and a board. So could you imagine that all rammed into 3 days? How am I really fulfilling my fiduciary responsibility when I'm just going through report after report? So I try to push boards to 2-hour meetings, 70 pages. Now, again, I see it much better in the corporate world. I think it's a huge area that nonprofits have to get better at. Does the board need to know this? And the something where staff gets a bad knock for it is boards have to stay consistent. Don't tell staff, oh, we don't get enough information. Like you got to commit to what you want. Like I've tried to push boards to say, then sign an agreement. Much like we sign a confidentiality agreement as board members, sign a time commitment that we are only going to ask staff to bring these sorts of reports forward. Don't tell me about, you know, I'm the president and this is what I did over the last 3 months. I went to this ribbon cutting. I went to this. That's great. I expect you to breathe. You're supposed to do that work. You're the president. Bring the stuff that the board needs to know. And that should be 2 hours, 70 pages, no more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really think that there is a point that the focus just naturally falls off after probably 3 hours. That a person, you know, if you're intently focused within a meeting, you can't put the same effort into the reports that are happening after the third hour. And if you're running 4 or 5 hours, you know, I think you're really not probably making good decisions. You know, you're really probably not giving that report the effort that it needs. So I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. Okay, I'd be a bad board member because I'm 10 minutes over. So that would mean the next committee is waiting to get in. So I don't know if there's any other questions. I don't see any. So I'm going to say thank you to everyone. Darren and Terry, thanks for the invite. And I hope that I get to serve on a board with one of you soon. So best of luck.
No, thanks everybody for attending as well. And as I said, we'll put out a survey. So once we do that, please, if you can take the quick moment just to respond to it. And we'll hopefully have this out as well. If you feel you want to review this out on video, post it as well and send out that link.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Okay,
you,
thank you,
Mario.
Mario.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Bye.